Welcome to this presentation on understanding plagiarism and copyright law. This presentation is going to give you a better understanding of what plagiarism and copyright law are and how they apply to our students, and hopefully to help you be more able to help students understand what these things are and how it applies to them so that they aren't committing any illegal acts or committing plagiarism in their work. Our first bit of information is about plagiarism. According to plagiarism.org and Merriam-Webster, plagiarism means the following: to steal and pass off the ideas or words of another as one's own, to use another's production without crediting the source, to commit literary theft, to present as new and original an idea or product derived from an existing source. It's important for our students to understand that there are different types of plagiarism and that it can also happen intentionally or unintentionally. So they may not know that they're committing plagiarism, and we see that a lot at 4th, 5th, and 6th grade because they're kind of for the first time doing big research projects and aren't really sure exactly what would be plagiarism. So they need to understand that even if they do it unintentionally, it still can be considered plagiarism. The next slide is a diagram about plagiarism, and this is just a visual for students to see. If they take somebody else's work, at the top there's 3 different papers, and use it in their own, it's plagiarism if there's no credit given. It's considered stealing published material, and even if they make small modifications to somebody else's words, it can still be plagiarism. So this is just another way for them to understand that. Students talked about what plagiarism is, again, taking someone else's work and ideas and presenting it as your own. There is a list of behaviors on plagiarism.org that is kind of more applicable for students. So turning in someone else's work as your own, copying words or ideas from someone else without giving credit, failing to put a quotation in quotation marks, giving incorrect information about the source of a quotation, changing words but copying the sentence structure of a source without giving credit, copying so many words or ideas from a source that it makes up the majority of your work, whether you give credit or not. So fair use would be if you use too much of a work. Fair use protects you, but if you use too much of a work to where you're not really presenting any of your own ideas and somebody else's work makes up the bulk of yours, it doesn't really fall under fair use anymore. And then also, it's important for students and teachers to understand that copying images, videos, and music can also be considered plagiarism. That's a very common thing to do. People a lot of times will go in and search on Google Images and just copy and paste an image into their work. So that would be considered plagiarism. And we have to teach our students how to go in the Google image search, find an image that's okay to reuse, and follow that image to its source to get the information to cite that source. Next are some consequences of plagiarism. Students understand that there are consequences as a student and also consequences as an adult. So as a student, students might get some of these following consequences: a warning, they could get a 0 on an assignment, they could get an office referral, they could, as they get older, maybe automatically fail a course, and that could be for college as well, and they also could get suspended. Some universities even expel students for plagiarism. For adults and professionals, plagiarism becomes even more serious. So as an adult, if you plagiarize, you could lose your reputation. People, if you're well-known, people could learn about you plagiarizing, and you lose kind of that trust that the people have for you. You could lose your job. You might face legal action resulting in monetary loss, and you could be sued, or you could even have to face jail time. So it's for our students, they are aware that they need to develop good habits and a good understanding of plagiarism now, so that as they get older and the consequences get more serious, they're able to not plagiarize unintentionally. So the following are some scenarios, and we're going to go through each one and determine whether or not this would be an example of plagiarism. During research for a social studies project, a student finds a quote he wants to use in his paper and an article from a library database. He copies the quote into his paper and provides quotation marks around the copied text. He then includes a citation for the original work on his reference page. This scenario would not be an example of plagiarism because this student did everything that he needed to do to give credit to somebody else for the work that he used. Scenario 2, a student really likes the summary of a book she read on Amazon.com. She copies and pastes the summary into her book report and changes a few words in the summary to sound more like her writing. This scenario is an example of plagiarism, and this student intentionally plagiarized. She changed some words in her summary to sound like her writing, which shows that she knew what she was doing is wrong. Scenario 3, a student is creating a presentation for science class. The student finds a perfect diagram to accompany her presentation in a search using Google Images. She copies the diagram into her presentation and later presents it to her class. This would be an example of plagiarism because the student did not give credit for the diagram to the owner of that diagram. Scenario 4, a student preparing a presentation on natural disasters embeds into his presentation a video of a volcano expert's advice to prepare for an eruption. As the expert speaks in the video, a song by Taylor Swift is audible in the background. The student correctly gives credit for the video to the creator and includes the proper information on his reference page. This scenario gets kind of murky on plagiarism because although the student did give credit for the video, which is really what they were trying to use and going for, there is a work in the background by a music artist that is not given credit for, and it wouldn't be legal to use it under copyright law anyway. So this is kind of a situation that you might want to avoid at all anyway. Scenario 5, a student learns that a friend of hers has already taken one of the classes she is in. She asks her friend for her research paper she did for the class and uses most of her friend's paper in her own paper. This is a common scenario among students, especially in high school, and it would be considered plagiarism because you're passing off somebody else's work as your own. Scenario 6, a student works hard to keep track of the sources he used during research. He makes sure to use quotations and paraphrase correctly when using someone else's work. When he turns in his paper, however, he does not include a reference page at the end. And unfortunately, this scenario would also be considered plagiarism. Even though the student worked hard to keep track of his sources and make sure that he was using quotations and paraphrasing in his work, he did not include references, so somebody who was looking at his final product would not be able to find the sources that he used. So that would also be considered plagiarism. So how can students avoid plagiarism? It's very important for us as educators to help students learn about plagiarism and exactly what makes up plagiarism so that they are able to avoid doing it. Students should be cautious and double check their work to make sure they have correctly cited the work of others and include the necessary information on the reference page. They need to remember that copying and pasting without giving credit is one of the most common types of plagiarism. So really, especially in 4th and 5th grade, as students are being introduced to these research projects, we need to instill in them that they cannot just copy and paste off of the internet. And this includes images and video. There are many websites and books you can use to help to format bibliographies and properly credit the work of others. Students need to ask their librarian or teacher to help find those resources if they can't find them. And when in doubt, students should ask a teacher for help. At the end of this presentation, you'll receive a handout that has additional resources, professional resources, and also resources you can use with students. And there are some bibliography formatting websites and guidelines that you can use with your students to help them format those things correctly and avoid plagiarizing. We're going to move on to copyright. Copyright is defined by Merriam-Webster as the following: the legal right to be the only one to reproduce, publish, or sell the contents in form of a literary, musical, or artistic work. This means that people who create music, art, stories, poems, or other written works automatically own the copyright to that work. Copyright gives the creator rights related to who can use their work and how they can use it. This protection is important because it keeps others from being able to profit off of the creator's work without his or her permission. So here are some key terms about copyright. The first is copyright infringement, and this is when someone uses a work protected by copyright law without permission. This is illegal, and this is what we want to really help students avoid doing. Fair use is an important term for students to know. It is a part of a copyright law, and it allows limited use of copyrighted material without permission from the copyright holder. So there is a way you can use copywritten information as long as you are meeting these criteria of fair use. They have to meet specific criteria to do that, and we'll go over those in a little bit. Public domain is another important term. It refers to works that are no longer protected by copyright due to the expiration of intellectual property. It is okay to use works in the public domain without permission, but policies and laws about which works are in the public domain may differ from country to country. So this is after a while, a work will expire out of copyright, and it's called being in the public domain, and it's okay to use that work without permission. But again, these policies differ from place to place, so it's important to know what copyright law is in your country. Next, the copyright law. So for the copyright holder, the law came in 1976, and if you create a work, these are the things that you are allowed to do with that work, and others cannot do these things without your permission. It includes performing the work publicly, displaying the work publicly, distributing copies of the work for sale. So those are the kinds of things that can get people in trouble for copyright infringement. So a copyright holder automatically has the right to do these things, and if you don't hold the copyright to a work and use it in these manners, then you can be in trouble for that. Fair use, we talked about it a second ago. It's not all of using another person's work is considered copyright infringement. There's some exceptions, and these 4 bullet points show you the exceptions, the criteria that you have to meet to be under fair use. So the nature of the use is considered. If it's for nonprofit purposes, it's going to be more likely to be fair use than if you're using someone's work to make money. The nature of the work itself, if it's more factual information, it's more likely to be under fair use than if it's a creative work, like a fiction book. The amount and significance of the work to be used, if you're using something small from someone's work, it's more likely to be fair use than if you're using a big chunk of their work. The effect of using the work on the market, and this is if you are using someone's work and you cause them to lose money because you've taken part of their work and you're making profit off of it and taking their people that would buy their work instead away, then that would be copyright infringement. Consequences of copyright infringement, and these are from Purdue University. There are severe consequences for infringing on copyright. You can pay the actual dollar amount of damages and profits. You can have to pay for $200,000 to $150,000 for each work that you infringe, and this kind of brings back to mind a few years ago when music was first being downloaded. People got in trouble and had to pay quite a bit of money for each song they downloaded illegally. So that's kind of when iTunes and other programs to pay for music came along. Infringer pays all attorney and fees and court costs. The infringer can go to jail. So you can be found guilty of breaking copyright law even if you didn't know you were doing it, just like plagiarism. So it's important for our students to understand that they have to get educated on this, and even if they aren't aware, they can still get in trouble for that. People who downloaded that music a few years ago weren't always aware that they were breaking the law and didn't mean to hurt anybody, but they still had to pay some penalties for doing that. So here's some more scenarios. So we're going to read each one to determine if it's infringement of copyright law. A student finds a book written in 1914 by an author who died in 1916 and uses much of his book and his paper without crediting the author. Although this would be kind of a moral plagiarism type issue, as for copyright law, the work is in the public domain, so it does not infringe on copyright. The student should. You go ahead and credit somebody for that work, though. Scenario 2, a student makes a movie in an iMovie or video in iMovie and uses a song by a popular artist from her iTunes account in the video. She uploads the finished video to YouTube. This would be copyright infringement because you're using someone else's work and then putting it as a public performance, which is kind of what YouTube is. Scenario 3, a teacher plays a movie that she owns for a class during lunch as a reward for good behavior. She makes sure the students know the movie was produced by Disney. This could be copyright infringement. When you play videos like this, movies, motion pictures actually, they have to be used for educational purposes, and there's no educational purpose for this one at all. Scenario 4, a local band performs a song at a restaurant that was created by a world-famous rock band. This could be copyright infringement if the band did not pay a cover fee for this song, a royalty fee. So it's kind of depending on, we need more information to determine on that one. Scenario 5, a student wants to use an image that appears in National Geographic magazine for a project. He copies the image and cites the source properly in his project. This would not be copyright infringement because it's under fair use. He's only using a portion. It's for educational purposes, and he cited it correctly. And this little graph shows you, the difference between plagiarism and copyright. Plagiarism is more of a moral issue, and copyright is more of a legal issue. And in both, you're taking somebody else's work without permission and passing it off as your own. So again, here at the end, we want students to make sure they're educated. They need to be aware of what these things are, and we can help them to not break copyright